Hi, I'm Dan Kubisky, co-chair of the International Community of the Society of Professional Journalists. Sunday, December 10, Argentina will inaugurate a new president. Javier Milei has been described as a conservative populist who plans to disrupt many of the social programs and institutions in Argentina. As a press freedom advocate, when I hear populist, whether from the left or right, I get nervous. From Hugo Chavez in Venezuela to Viktor Orban in Hungary, we have seen too many examples where populists, once in power, have moved to restrain press freedom. So we're going to talk about what we might expect in Argentina under the new administration with Beatriz Garcia Nice. She is a senior program associate at the Wilson Center, and she studies the issues of democratic governance in Latin America. Beatriz, thank you very much for being here today. Milei has made clear his plans to overhaul Argentina's economy and government, but has he given any indication of his attitude about press freedom or the media?
Thank you, Dan, for having me here, and hello to your audience. I think the main thing about Milei is that people don't really know what to expect. Certainly academics and experts that have been studying Latin America for a while. Milei sees himself or has cataloged himself as a liberal libertarian, right? But I think we can't pigeonhole him necessarily into those definitions because he's shown different views depending on the issue that you ask of him. For example, he said that he plans to really restrict women's rights, LGBT plus community rights, and also seriously question abortion legislation that has been passed in Argentina. So when you see it from that sense, he's not necessarily fitting the definition of a liberal libertarian. But when you do ask him about the government, the state institutions, the central bank, dollarizing the economy, he does fit into that category. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he deals with these contradictions and also how he deals with the more moderate side that he showed after the first round of the elections to try to get the support from those indecisive voters that didn't necessarily agree with either of the candidates, but wanted to punish incumbent for economic minister Sergio Massa.
So, okay, so he really hasn't talked, he's talked about gender rights and LGBTQ rights. It sounds like he has not discussed or given any indication on what might be on the right to speech, right to press. During the campaigns, both the initial campaign and then the runoff, what was his relationship with the press like? I mean, did he give any indication there of, was he friendly, was he hostile, or how could you look at it that way?
I think during his campaign, he was mostly hostile to the interactions that he had with members of the press, right? He hasn't necessarily straightforward criticized them, but he has made certain comments about the fact that the press might not provide the right context to his comments, right? He's spoken about, for example, absolute liberty and how that will fit with press freedom, we're not necessarily sure. I think we are, though, going to see something of a hostile relation or uneasy relationship, such as the one that, for example, President Trump had in the United States, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and currently the one that President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has in Mexico, right? Where they just let people know that the information that they're getting from the press is not necessarily what they really want to convey, and that their narrative is going to be the one that will matter and not press. And that obviously has a very negative effect on people's perception and people's trust on press freedom and the right to speak freely about what you think, because you're going to get an immediate pushback and an immediate comeback from the president, from the state machine, right? That he will obviously have when he gets into power.
What are the institutions like in Argentina that might help combat, let's say, an aggressive presidency against press freedom, or again, all the other civil rights that we think about, that when we tie in press freedom, we talk about freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. Are there institutions that are strong enough to push back against this, or well, I'm sorry, just go ahead.
Well, he's talked a lot about reducing the size of the state, right? And what we can tell from that is that he will most likely reduce those ministries that do have some sort of civil society pushback, such as, the Ministry for Women and Gender, and the Minister of Culture, the Minister of Social Well-being. So from the state, he is going to shrink the state significantly from what he says, or it was one of his campaign promises, and something that really appealed to voters because of the economic crisis that Argentina is facing. However, one very important thing to keep in mind is that Argentina has a very strong civil society, right? And they have a very strong presence, as well as citizens trust the press, right? They're in a very well standing with the general citizenship. So even though he might try to push back on the state portion of it, I think that the civil society within Argentina will put up a fight against this.
Okay, yeah, you anticipated my next question was, what is the relationship between the public and the press? Is it one of trust? Is it one of support back and forth? So do you see that if there were attacks made on press freedom by the new administration, that we could see support coming from society and social groups?
I would say yes, with a caveat. Something that Javier Milei has really managed to do very well is to have a fervent support from those that support him, right? And are mostly young male, the youth in general, but specifically, he's been very, very successful with his narrative with young men. And I believe that if the press disregards or disqualifies an argument or a position that goes against what Milei has conveyed to this core group of supporters, I think that there might be a switch. But overall, Argentines respect the press. They come from, this is the 40th anniversary of them coming back to a democratic regime, right? They take that very seriously. They give it a lot of importance. A lot of people that voted for Milei just did it as a punishment vote to Kirchnerismo and Peronism, right? So it's not that they necessarily want an overhaul, but that they just could not vote and give another term to Sergio Massa and Kirchnerism. So I think that yes, Argentine society can sort of push back, but there is that caveat of that very stronghold that Milei has managed to achieve in young males.
All right. Well, that actually sounds more encouraging than my initial reaction once I heard that a chainsaw wielding populist had been elected president of such a very important country in this hemisphere. Is there anything else you'd like to add about Milei and his relationship with the press, his views about the press, or how the press views him before we sign off?
Well, I would say that it will be very interesting to see how he manages this dichotomy of positioning himself or categorizing himself as a liberal libertarian, and then how he actually deals with these rights that might contradict him directly during his government. I think that to this day we still don't have a clear view of what liberty really means for Javier Milei and how far he's going to push on those rights. He might come to power and feel like and see how overwhelming dire the situation is in Argentina in the economic front with dollarization, with some of the big promises that he made, and how to sort of appease to the coalitions that he managed to get with the more conservative side, with the more right-hand side, such as former President Macri's and former candidate Patricia Bullrich. So we will have to see if that actually comes to fruition, or if he fails in some of those big promises that he's made, and the easy way out is just to turn himself completely against sort of those, issues that are press freedom, abortion rights, women's rights, advancing cultural rights within Argentina. So I think we should really maintain an open mind as to how he's going to manage this and not come to any conclusions, because the situation is so volatile in Argentina, even after his win, that we might be surprised.
Okay, fair enough. Maybe we can come back to you in 6 months or a year and see how things have gone, if he's lived up to expectations, or as some people might say, live down to expectations, and see what's happened in Argentina under his administration. This is
absolutely. I do think there is going to be some sort of like punching bag whenever he doesn't know how to or who to blame. He'll punch the press, but we'll see how far and how strong or how hard that punching will be.
So thank you, Beatriz Garcia Nice, Program Associate with the Wilson Center. Thank you for being our guest today and for giving us a first look at what we might expect to see in Argentina.
It was my pleasure, Dan. Thank you for having me.